folks. My name is Adam Pratt, joining you here from Chicago. Today, I work on the Creative Cloud and Document Cloud teams, and we are excited to have you join us for our first virtual IT Roundtable. So we're going to be together for about an hour, and we're going to just talk about some IT issues relevant to Creative Cloud, Document Cloud, Acrobat, and talk about some transitions in technology and some best practices, and also hear from a customer about some of the transitions that they've made and things that you can learn from that to do a similar transition. So this is, as I mentioned, this is a virtual roundtable. Sometimes we've done these in person. Today we're here virtually with you, and we appreciate you joining us. This is the first of many in a series, so stay tuned. We'll be getting the word out about doing these hopefully on a monthly basis, covering different topics. Today's just kind of general purpose. In the future, we'll be focusing on different aspects of security, deployment, and other topics that come up. So first in the series, and glad you could join us. Let me look at my notes. A couple of other kind of topics or kind of context that I wanted to give, and this is, I'm going to speak off camera for a moment here because I do need to see slides. I don't know, Alex, if that's something that you could share. For your patience. This is, as I mentioned, this is our first virtual event, so we've got a few kinks to work out. But what I want to do is just walk you guys through a little bit of a timeline in terms of where we've been in the past, and some changes that have happened with Creative Cloud. Awesome. So is that up on screen? No. Okay. Awesome. So we may have a slide to show you. If not, let me just narrate kind of some of the history that I think would be helpful, some of the context. So if we just rewind a little bit, back 5 or 6 years ago, Adobe originally announced and released Creative Cloud for Enterprise, which hopefully many of you guys are members of. We released that in late 2012, so it was like 6 years ago. So I mentioned that just for context that we've been at this a while. In 2014, we released the admin console, which many of you by now are probably at least a little bit familiar with. And then in 2015, we released support for single sign-on, making the process of managing your users and automating that process that much easier. Over the last couple of years then, we made a lot of improvements to deployment, making the deployment of the actual software easier and faster. And then in 2017, I'm just looking at my notes here, we added the user sync tool, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, again, to just make that process more automated than ever. So I mentioned that history just to remind us where we've been. And so we've made a lot of progress to make the process easier in terms of managing licenses, managing entitlements, deploying software, things like that. But in addition to that, I wanted to let you know some key dates and milestones that are coming up that are going to be really important for all of us. So looking at my notes, 2 key dates. In October of 2018, so that's just later this year, there's going to be a key change related to Creative Cloud and Acrobat, which is in order to take advantage of the new features. We always have Max every year, a large creativity conference. In order to take advantage of new features shipping in October and later in Acrobat and Creative Cloud, you'll need to take advantage of named user licensing. So that is to say that if your software is still deployed with a serial number, that software will still function, but in order to access new features and new versions and new applications, you'll need to be on named user licensing. So that's one of the big reasons we've joined together to talk to you about that transition. The other thing is then in November of 2018, so just a month later, for many customers, their serial numbers will be expiring at the end of their agreements, and it'll kind of force the need to transition to named user licensing. If that applies to you, we'll be in touch. It won't be a surprise. We'll be communicating that with you. But there's some key dates there. So this is really important that we get on this project as soon as possible and make that transition. And Adobe's here to help you, not only in this context to educate you, but we'll talk about the process and the resources to do that today. So with that context, I'm going to turn things to our group chat here, I guess a panel of sorts. So I mentioned my name's Adam. I work on the Creative Cloud team. If you guys can maybe run down the line and introduce yourselves for context, and then Rick, I'll hand it over to you to learn more.
Okay. Well, thanks, Adam. My name is Rick Borstein. I manage Adobe's digital media solution consulting team. for North America. So what my team does is they work with some of our largest customers and help them understand the products they're buying and help them make this transition, which you've been talking about. And I'm like you, Adam. I've been here a long time, 24 years for me, and love Adobe. And I think this is an exciting time for us because we are making this transition, and not just to make it difficult for customers, but to deliver new kinds of value that makes it easier for the creatives and the knowledge workers that we support.
My name is Kevin Stomeyer. I'm the Director of Creative Technical Services for Uline. We're a shipping supply company based out of Pleasant Prairie, Wisconsin. So I'm the customer part of the presentation for today.
Cool. Thanks for being here.
And Kevin's one of our longtime friends. He does training work with lynda.com. He's a frequent presenter about Adobe subjects, so don't let him sell himself short. I'm James Lockman. I manage a team of consultants in the digital media part of Adobe's business, and we specialize in connecting customers' data centers, specifically their user management systems, your Active Directory, your LDAP, that kind of thing, with the Adobe Admin Console. And we'll talk some more about what that means for you a little bit later. We'll hand it back to Adam.
Super. Good stuff. Well, thank you guys for being here. Appreciate it. Rick, I'll hand it over to you. I know you worked with Kevin through their process and transition and know the situation with them in a lot more detail than I do. So why don't you give a little bit of context, how you came into this and what that process was like?
Okay, well, what we do at Adobe is we have, like a lot of companies, big sales teams and so on, but we also have solution consultants. So we go in, maybe about 3 years ago, we came to you guys and said, we're making this transition from serial numbers to name user. What is that going to mean for you? And I sat down with Kevin to talk about that. We met with some of your creatives, we met some of your security folks, your IT folks, and maybe before we get started, Kevin, Uline's a pretty big company.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys actually do?
Well, Uline is North America's largest supplier of shipping supplies, material handling, janitorial supplies, a whole wide range of products. It's started out as a catalog company. We do have a big e-com presence now, but yeah, it's a really big, large sales company.
So if I need cardboard boxes,
you need boxes, you find us.
Tape.
Yep, tape.
pallet jacks,
You
name it. Yeah.
all that stuff. Yep, it's all coming from us.
So big company, big catalogs.
Mhm.
And so what your creatives, before you went to end user licensing, what were they doing with our products? What kind of work?
So our creative department produces all of the marketing for our company, like I said, including catalogs, printed materials, direct marketing materials. To support that, we also do all of our web site materials in-house, email marketing, landing pages, things like that. We've gotten into social media over the past few years, Google ads, a lot of that. All of that comes from our creative department.
Okay, and that all drives your business.
Yep.
And one of the reasons, I asked you here, Kevin, is so oftentimes here in the Midwest, we kind of lag the coast a little bit.
We're a conservative bunch, and when we bring in someone from San Francisco or New York, sometimes it doesn't seem very real to our IT customers. So I thought that we'd stay in the Midwest here for this first one, and kind of talk about what it's like for a Midwestern firm with our conservative values and all that to talk about. So is that kind of, what's your IT like there? Are you guys conservative?
We're conservative. The phrase that I use is we like to run with the big dogs, but we don't want to lead the pack.
Okay.
So we're not always the first ones out of the gate, but we're also not lagging behind as far as other companies are concerned. Security is always a big consideration for us when it comes to IT implementation, especially with things like Creative Cloud and Adobe Experience Manager.
Okay, so that's great. So Adobe Experience Manager, for those here, is part of our digital marketing end of things. So we won't be talking too much about that, but the same user management system applies to both. So a little about your background. I've known you for a number of years because you know our products pretty well. Why did Uline come to you and say, I need you to help me out?
Well, part of the reason was our creative department is fairly large and our IT department is fairly large. And so what my department actually does is it's called creative tech. So we're 1 foot in IT, we're 1 foot in the creative department. So we're kind of the liaison between the creatives and the IT professionals. So we help manage the relationship between both. When I came on board, we were still on Creative Suite and looking to upgrade, and we were also implementing and looking at Adobe Experience Manager for our website, for our assets. So my experience with Adobe, my background's in training. So I was an educator for 9 years before I went into corporate training with Adobe. So all of that experience in conference speaking stuff kind of led me towards the technical side of things more than the creative design side of things. So I ended up at Uline very happily, and have been there for the past 3 years, kind of helping manage software, hardware needs for the creative department, including the Adobe products.
Okay. And so when you got to Uline, you kind of saw what the lay of the land was. And what did you want to accomplish when you initially got there? What were your goals?
One of the goals was updating software, making sure that they had the software that they needed with the improvements that came with Creative Cloud and the individual products that would help speed, efficiency, and operations to give the creatives the time they need to create, instead of spending more time working on, managing or handling files or things like that. So that was one of my main goals, was to upgrade them and bring them up both with hardware and software.
Okay. So fast forward, you get there, we've got a new version of Creative Cloud. It uses named user licensing. And, back in the old days, you get your Photoshop box and had the little card
Right.
with serial number on it, right? Remember that? And you plug that in when you packaged it up, and that was it.
Yep.
And now your users need to log in to activate the software.
Correct.
And so what was it like to talk to your IT people about that, your security people, and get that going? I know there were some infrastructure issues at first that you ran into.
Right. Well, one of the things that we noticed when we started looking at enterprise licensing was we had a lot of different departments that were kind of purchasing ad hoc on their own. So the licensing for serialization, serialized licenses really put us at a disadvantage. We didn't have a full scope of what software we had in-house, who was using what, did they really need this? It was kind of almost hereditary that you took this person's position, so you got their software. When we switched over and started looking at enterprise with named user licensing, our IT department obviously did an audit and kind of gathered everything up. And two things that came out of it: one, it really unifies our management. So we now have a full idea of how much usage we have at a corporate level, which helps us with our contracts for enterprise, but also for deployment. When we have named user licensing, we can switch. So if somebody changes teams or transitions out of a position, we can reclaim that and repurpose that software very easily, where before it was serialized and it was basically on that computer. So we would have to deauthorize the computer, take the serialized number off, reapply it to somewhere else. It was a lot of manual work for our IT department. Now it's a lot easier with the admin console.
Okay, so what you're talking about there is just giving the same license to another user,
right?
With named user license. Okay, that makes sense.
And the other thing that I'm thinking that's different there is you're doing that remotely. Like you're
right.
doing that with a computer and a web browser, like wherever you happen to be.
Right.
You don't have to like go find that person and their physical computer
right.
to do all that old process.
Exactly.
So I think it's worthwhile to pause for a moment and explain a little bit about this concept of a license pool. When you're purchasing enterprise software from Adobe, you're not buying a license attached to an individual. You're buying a pool of licenses that can be applied through this admin console that Kevin was talking about to anybody you choose to attach it to. And that gives you that flexibility to say, oh, Jane has moved on to another role. We're going to withdraw that license from Jane. We're going to apply it to Bill, who's now taking that role. And it all happens remotely, as Adam says, and potentially through automation. But it's a lot easier because you don't have to take the software off. It's just a matter of deprovisioning the user. If Jane tries to start up her laptop and tries to turn on Photoshop, it'll say, hey, you need to get a license to Photoshop. You don't have it.
Darn Jane. So a lot of other vendors offer named user licensing, Microsoft and others. Any differences that you've seen between those programs?
Not really. When we ramped up to named user licensing, it ended up being kind of a boon for our creative department because it was easier for them. They log in with their email and their ID, and they have the software. We don't really see a huge difference between named user licensing between other applications and this, as far as ease of use for the end user.
So your end users are used to that.
Right.
Well, that's good to know. So let's take a step back to getting it in there. So
Sure.
this is a change,
Yep.
no more pushing out serialized versions. And
Mhm.
now you've got Creative Cloud, and cloud's in the name, guys,
Yep.
right? So you heard that, right? Sometimes organizations hear that and like cloud, especially in the Midwest, right?
Yep.
So what was that like? What kind of obstacles did you run into, and how did you get past them?
It took a little bit of, well, as you know, it took a few meetings
Right.
to go through security audits and things like that. One of the things that we compromised on, and rightfully so, we have a lot of proprietary information and things like that, designs and things that we don't really want out in the public forum until the mail date or the drop date for the release. So having cloud share really kind of rubbed some IT people the wrong way. So what we ended up doing was a compromise. We ended up using the cloud features, but not the cloud storage, which was kind of nice. That was one of the things that we got with Enterprise, that we had serialized, it would have been every person individually managed and no control over that. Having it be Enterprise with named user licensing, we have full control over that now. So we can integrate things like Typekit for certain users. So our creative department specifically has access to Typekit.
And
Other
these like for
users-
fonts. and
Fonts,
design
yeah,
work.
font syncing and things like that. We utilize that in our creative department, but there are other departments that don't really need that. So we don't cluster them together. We break them apart into different deployment modules. And then also things like libraries. So we use libraries quite a bit in our department for both master colors. We have a list of master colors that we use at Uline that different teams will share back and forth with. And then also certain teams use libraries for things like iconography or certain things for, say, instructional manuals. There's little graphics that they'll use that they'll share between their team in a shared library situation. So that's what we use the cloud services for. But we've turned off the cloud syncing as far as file sharing and things like that. So that's been a great win for us.
Okay. And so what are the end users saying? What were they saying? Hey, I've got the latest software and able to use these services. Were they happy? Did you get good feedback?
Yeah, we got really good feedback. The upgrade was welcome, especially when it came in terms of like Photoshop and a lot of the advances that had come out in Photoshop. It was a pretty big jump going from CS5 to, I think we jumped to Creative Cloud 2014 or 2015.
That is a big jump, yeah.
It was a big jump.
Like 4
And
versions.
and it was a very welcome. So there was a lot of training involved. So that was kind of most of my first year was training and doing sessions and educating people about the upgrades.
Yeah.
But it's been a welcome change. And in fact, we're looking now to upgrade to 2018 with the latest release.
Cool.
So.
And so how often do you upgrade? Is this something you do annually or?
We do it annually. We always do a review. So there's a testing phase and there's a review phase. The situation that we're in right now, it's reliant mostly on hardware. So, we want to get the latest and greatest software, but we also need to make sure that we have the proper hardware to support it. And when you're talking about, over 100 users, there becomes, budget requests and things like that for the hardware and for the software upgrade. So that's always a consideration. So we try and do it annually in between our catalog cycles and go from there.
And do you have any dependencies on, in the software with plugins or things like that come to mind?
We do use a PIM plugin.
Okay.
We have a plugin that we use for our catalog that handles our pricing and charting. So there's always a reliance on that. Before we upgrade to InDesign, we always make sure that the plugin is up to date and it's compatible with the current version of InDesign. And again, that falls into the testing phase that we go through. So we have a great team of data managers that goes through and handles that PIM and makes sure that the plugin's ready before we take a look at upgrading the software.
And that's pretty typical, Adam, because we have customers who have these sort of dependencies. And I think one occasional piece of misinformation about Creative Cloud is that IT doesn't have control over those versions, and that isn't the case. You do have control. You probably use like you have Casper Suite or SCCM.
Casper. Yeah, we use Casper to do our deployments.
Okay, super. So, besides Creative Cloud, do you also manage Acrobat or any other Adobe tools using?
We manage Acrobat now through our admin console. That's one of the things that with our current contract, we went through and audited to make sure that we switched over from serialized from Acrobat to named licensing. So for some users, that is a change, recent change, but it helps us as far as management and deployment, having everyone under one umbrella with the named user licensing.
The other thing, just to jump in, that I'm thinking about what you talked about, Kevin, is that the ad hoc purchasing you had,
Mhm.
not only, where departments would, or an individual just would buy their own license, you had kind of an IT hassle there, right? And some unknown factors. You were also like paying as much as possible, right?
Right.
Like, but by by virtue of consolidating all of your users as well as your creative and Acrobat into one agreement, you're gonna, you've got more negotiation
Right.
leverage with Adobe, frankly, right?
Yeah.
Like you're gonna get the best price by doing that together.
Mhm.
So you kind of killed two birds with one stone there.
Exactly.
So, I mean, is that
Yeah.
your experience?
That's totally our experience this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually just re-upped this year
Okay.
for our contract, and that was our
Recently,
experience.
yeah,
Yeah.
like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate
Yes,
that.
you're welcome.
Appreciate
Yeah.
that very much. So, admin console that allows you to restrict, sharing things. Are you guys using that? Was that
We
a
are.
welcome change?
That was a welcome change. It was something that we were doing manually on our own, but now that that's part of the admin console, it's something that we've looked at and we're starting to implement.
So I think what we're talking about here is something called asset settings.
Mhm.
Sometimes people call it sharing restrictions. It allows you to limit sharing to within your own domain or designated domains so that your users can't take your proprietary
Out of-
product
Yep.
designs and share them outside the organization.
Yeah. No
Exactly.
Gmail users, no
Right,
like.
Yeah.
And that's an enterprise feature. That's important. That's a part of
Yeah.
something that you get as buying an enterprise agreement with Adobe. You have access to that capability.
Well, this is great. Well, thanks so much for being here with us today. It's interesting to see how you're using it and go Midwest, right?
Yeah.
All of you. But I'm going to throw it back to you, Adam, and
Yeah.
hopefully we've covered. Anything else you want to add?
No, we're happy.
Yeah.
One thing that we're looking forward to doing going forward is we have named licensing, but we're actually looking to go to SSO with our Active Directory. So that'll actually automate things for us. Instead of manually adding users, they'll be coming in from AD groups, which will be the next step for us.
Yeah.
So it's just the next evolution in our management.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that because at Adobe, we talk a lot about single sign-on, like we're excited about it, we support it, but sometimes we can talk about it so much that it seems like it's necessary.
Mhm.
And we know there's lots of organizations that maybe don't have that place and aren't ready for it, and that's fine. There's other entitlement technologies that we support, and that's what you guys have been doing for a couple of years
Right.
now, right? So you guys have been on named user licensing, been taking advantage of all the cloud features that you want to, and now based on just some technology changes for you guys,
Yes,
you're ready
backend
for it.
technology, server changes that
Yeah.
we've had.
Yeah, so you're ready for it. You can start in one place, kind of migrate to
Mhm.
single sign-on when you're ready. And it sounds like you guys are about to do that. Any comments at Adobe's Summit conference?
Yeah,
Any comments on that?
Uline sent a team out. Like I said earlier, we're clients for Adobe Experience Manager for assets. We sent a small team out to Summit. We do every year. We're looking to upgrade this year for the latest instance of AEM.
Yeah.
And really enjoyed it. It was probably one of the better summits that we've been to, mainly because we're kind of laser focused knowing that we're going to upgrade. So we brought back a lot of actionable items, a lot of things that we're kind of excited to test out with Adobe Sensei and things like that. So yeah, it was very interesting because most of the time we go to MAX, which is the creativity conference,
Right.
to go to Summit, which is the marketing conference, kind of see the other side of the house.
Yeah.
And it's just really interesting. They really excite their base with their keynotes, and then go into the sessions and really get some good key takeaways that you can bring back and utilize. So very practical. Yeah, it's good.
Good. That's awesome. Good stuff. Well, thank you guys, Rick. Thanks for working with Kevin, knowing their process, and Kevin, for you to share your story and go through these changes with us. There's Rick said he's been here 24 years. I've been here 18 years, and there's always a change, right? Whether it's Intel chips or OS 10 or something. If you're in technology, you got to be ready for a change. It's always something. So. And it's nice to hear that there's a change with named user licensing and migrating away from serial numbers, but there's a benefit, right? In terms of what your folks have access to, less hassle for you guys from an IT perspective, better sense of compliance, it sounds, because you actually know who's using what. You're not like scared about what did they do with software fonts that's not allowed. So that's cool to hear. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good stuff. So let's transition to James Lockman. Thank you for being here.
Anytime.
Tell us a little bit more about the team that you work on, the kind of work that you guys do before we drill into some of the details.
Sure. The team that I manage has a number of consulting groups that will go out and work with customers to activate the connection between their directory system and the Adobe Admin Console. We've heard a lot about some of the benefits of the Admin Console today, particularly around attaching licenses to users. The Admin Console, being a good enterprise solution, has an API. We call it the User Management API. And that API means you can develop applications that can go and ask it to do things like, hey, I want you to take Kevin and give him access to everything that they have from Adobe. Fantastic. And we do that through aligning the user with a product and typically through a group. So if you look at the way that it's organized, you'll see that there's groups. Inside of the groups, we put people, and then the groups also will have a product aligned with them so that those people in the groups inherit the product, but it makes it easy to move them around. So if you've got somebody in the marketing group and they need access to just Photoshop, then maybe they're in that group, but then you move them to someplace else within the Admin Console. Our team develops software that takes advantage of that user management API. And it's called the User Sync tool. And this tool sits inside of our customer's data center. It's not in Adobe's data center. It sits out there. They manage it entirely, typically on a virtual machine, very lightweight kind of tool. And it's looking at the LDAP or the directory instance. It's comparing it to what's happening in the Adobe Admin Console, and then it will synchronize anything that needs to be changed or modified or added or deleted inside of the Admin Console, and it will do that. So it runs on a schedule, typically. And our team does the implementations with customers. So we'll go in, spend a few weeks with a customer, sometimes longer, sometimes less, expose them to the technology. Typically, it's new at that point to them. Some of our customers will have our initial presentation, and then they will say, okay, great. They'll take the documentation. We come back a week later and say, we're all done. This was great. Thank you. And others will say, okay, we've started our security audit now, and we'll take months and months, and finally we'll get around to it. But the end result is that we have user automation at scale. We think about some of our enterprise customers will have a couple of hundred users. Some of them will have 100,000 users or more. And when you get above about 100 users, it gets to be challenging to use the Admin Console by hand. There's a way to use the Admin Console with a CSV upload, and you can take a spreadsheet essentially of users, and you can add them to the console and also have change operations. But that still involves manipulating that spreadsheet, which can be time consuming for someone in IT. If we can automate that process, then it makes it much easier. So as Kevin was talking about, all of the license attachment, or at least the license assignment and alignment, is going to happen in LDAP. IT will make a change, add you to an LDAP security group, and then that will just propagate up to Adobe, and that person has access to that software. That's the idea, which is great.
So in a way, I'll paraphrase. I might brutalize this a little bit, but in a way, I mean, I'm thinking about the folks in the audience. They're here because they have Creative Cloud. They've got some Adobe software, maybe Acrobat, Document Cloud. They've got users, and they're managing those users in something like LDAP, some kind of a directory system. And what you guys do is marry those.
We marry those up.
In an automated way. So I'm not like onesie twosie, adding, deleting, reassigning, making that automated.
Yes.
Right. So if someone leaves the organization, that's one real value of this user sync tool.
Yeah. And I'd like to talk about that because there's two parts to this. Kevin had brought up the concept of single sign-on. And single sign-on is all about ensuring that you are entitled to get to the next gate, right? So you go through the single sign-on process. If you've taken someone out of the enterprise directory, they can't get past that single sign-on gate. They can't log into Creative Cloud because they stop at the SSO window, okay? So from the IT perspective, if you know you've got to quickly remove someone, we hate to do that, but sometimes it happens. Your first defense in that is by taking them, just shutting them down in LDAP. Now they're no longer able to sign into software. They're out. The second level would be to de-entitle them to software so that, and that might happen a few minutes later, depending on the, the timing of the thing. But that would then tell the user sync tool, remove this user from the active group, they'll go and take them down. In the enterprise, it's important that we not lose the user, because a lot of times they'll have content that's associated with them. So if you had somebody leave, you don't want to remove the work that they've been working on. So that user will remain and their content will remain. They won't be able to access it, but the user still exists, and IT can then, within their policies, reassign that user to somebody else and then get at that content later. So that's a pretty common situation.
Yeah, and what you brought up there, when we think about named user licensing, the first question everybody asks is onboarding, right? How do I get my users in there? How do I get them entitled? And that's like the obvious. Glad you mentioned that. So Kevin, we heard from you that you've done this in your organization.
A customer with over 1 million users yet.
Okay. But you've had six-figure customers.
We have had a couple of 100,000.
Yeah.
Just last week, we brought on one large customer with about 110,000 users into the console. That took a few hours, but it got done.
Yeah. A few hours. That sounds pretty good.
It's pretty quick.
Yeah.
It's a lot better than tapping on the keys, I'll tell you
right.
what.
Well, and I'm thinking there's two angles in this. One, like Kevin, you work for like as Rick said, kind of a conservative Midwest company. And that has some of its challenges. You've also got challenges when you've got 110,000 users. You've got a different kind of challenge. But I think it's interesting to hear both examples of like anybody can do this. Like customers of all different sizes and kinds are doing this, which is helpful. So if you're dealing with customers that big and that many users, and you guys have dealt with a lot of customers, what are some best practices that your team has identified that we could all learn from here and on the virtual audience about how to make that smooth?
I think the first thing is take a look at your user base and think carefully about how you want to organize them with respect to software licensing. And the reason I say that is because on the Adobe side, we allow you to create groups, and the groups can have specific products attached to them, which is great. But those products can be configured to have different conditions attached. So Kevin was talking about some people need typekit, some people don't need typekit. You can take the software configuration that's Creative Cloud, and you can build like a sub configuration of it that doesn't have typekit. Attach that to a group, and then put the people who need Photoshop but not typekit. Don't know why that would be, but maybe you need to do that.
It's got a reason.
No reason, right? You put them in that group. So think carefully about the software and the different capabilities you want activated or deactivated. Build groups with those entitlements and then put the people in there. Another thing to know is that people can exist in multiple groups. And that's very useful because rather than moving them, attaching them to a product and then worrying about whether they're in the right product, I can just put them in the group. And if the product configuration changes, oh, great. Then everybody in the group is going to get that product configuration. So definitely do that.
Okay. So that's a good first step.
The second step is to look at how you want to entitle users. We offer 3 different identity types at Adobe. There's the Adobe ID, which we do not recommend for enterprise, just putting that out there right now. There's the enterprise ID that many of our customers use, and there's a federated ID. The enterprise ID doesn't use single sign-on. It uses a serial number that's stored, a password that's stored at Adobe. And then federated is going to defer the password portion of your login to your enterprise identity system. So most of our customers are using federated ID with single sign-on. That's what the vast majority of our customers are doing. And customers that got on early, like Uline, might have started with an enterprise ID, but they're making the migration. I think we were talking about that before the show. We're going to make the migration to SSO at that point. So definitely look at SSO. Make sure that you have the right people. So third piece would be make sure you have the right people in place to make the transition from, say, your unmanaged Adobe IDs into the console. So you have to have your SSO person. Make sure that you have that person around. Make sure you have somebody who has access to your identity system ready to play. And also make sure that you have your software deployment people prepared because you will have to take a step. Kevin had talked about this where they had CS5 deployed. You've got to get rid of that and put out Creative Cloud.
Yep.
There's going to be a little bit of training that the end users will have to have at the beginning. That it'll be muscle memory very quickly, but they're going to need to know that there'll be a change and they need to be prepared for that change. The software that we provide, this isn't a tip, it's more advice to the audience. The software, this user sync tool thing that we make, is freely available in GitHub. It is the only thing you'll find from Adobe that is 100% open source. We encourage everybody to get in there and use it. I shouldn't say 100%. A lot of the Marketing Cloud technology is open source. But from the creative side of the business, this is an open source project. We want folks to use it. We look and see the customers who do use it, and we're surprised every week when we look at that report at folks we don't know about that are using the user sync tool.
They're just taking care of it themselves.
They found it, they install it. It's great. We've got some Kickstart documentation that's available, and the user sync tool actually has documentation in 6 languages. So it's a global effort, and we want folks to take advantage of that and stop typing in the admin console and start automating. It works not only with your creative, so Kevin was talking about his AEM, but other Marketing Cloud solutions and Document Cloud use the admin console today for license alignment and license assignment.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the things that we try to be careful about, but it's not always obvious, is we talk about this as the Adobe admin console, right? It's not the Creative Cloud console, because if we built a console for every product, that would kind of stink, right? We want it to be universally available. So it covers Creative Cloud, which is the team I work on. It covers Document Cloud and Acrobat. It also covers Stock. If anybody's using Adobe Stock, that all integrates there. You mentioned it covers our digital marketing products. And then we also just recently added Captivate and Presenter. So more and more products are coming in there. So it really becomes this one-stop shop, regardless of what I'm managing from the Adobe side. I get to do it in one place.
I think it's important too. It manages, say, access to software in the case of desktop software. So there's a software license attached. You can do that. But it also manages access to a pool of consumable resources like Adobe Stock, where you might have 10,000 credits available, and then people are using them at various rates depending on what they're getting from Adobe Stock.
You can see and reassign. Cool. So other questions for you, James. See, I'm just looking down my list. Can you talk about resources? Like what's available to a customer who's ready to tackle this project? Where do they start? What should they check out?
So we had said before that we have some quick start documentation in the GitHub, but also there's a Spark, Adobe Spark. If you're not using it, you should check out Adobe Spark. We have a nice little Spark presentation that kind of goes through it, and that'll get put into the chat pod. So you should see that in the chat pod. And our GitHub has not only the various builds available, but also all the documentation for User Sync tool. If you want to build a user management API application, some of our customers choose to do that because they've got an identity system that's wacky and doesn't quite work with the out-of-the-box stuff. Use the User Sync tool as a starting point. It's all Python. It's easy to digest. And if not, the Adobe I/O portal has the documentation for the user management API. We will be releasing within the month a training course for doing the User Sync implementation. So if you're a kind of person who hates to read the manual but likes to watch videos, you are on YouTube right now. There's a pretty good chance that this might be an option for you, and we look forward to having that released. So that will be a self-sign-up course. It has a number of modules in it that you'll have to complete, but it will take you through the complete process of standing up the environment and connecting to your Okta and deciding what your license alignment and group alignment looks like and so on, to get down to the point where you're actually syncing users with the console. So we want to make it, again, as self-service as possible and easy for IT to implement.
Okay, super. So you said that free courseware should be available within the next month?
Should be by the end of April.
And the price is?
That would be free, as you just said, free. That free courseware.
Just
I mentioned that our tool is open source. We really believe, our group that manages this tool really believes that we want everybody to have it. We want as many customers as possible to use it.
Yep.
It's constantly evolving from customer requests and from feedback that we get from customers, both from customers, we're engaged with them, but also from coming in out of the GitHub. We'll get issue requests and we'll go and respond to those. So
Yep.
We think that this is a brave new world for us at Adobe to be producing training materials and software to help our enterprise customers that doesn't involve spinning up a big consulting engagement.
Yeah.
We don't want that.
Yeah. Get it done quick.
Get it done quick. Get you active fast and using those software.
So I don't know the answer. I'm gonna go out on a limb. I'm gonna go back to Kevin. So there's generally two parts to this process. There's the consideration and planning, right? Like I might have to do a security review, and I know we help you guys with that. There's all the due diligence, and then there's actually the doing.
Right.
Can you give us a ballpark what those two phases were for you guys? Was one longer than the other? How did that balance?
The prep work was definitely longer. Doing
Okay.
the audit and the security checks and things
Yeah.
like that, and working through the planning
Okay.
definitely took longer. The deployment, the admin console allows us to make deployment packages, and our IT department does the deployment through Casper.
Okay.
So we have either a self-service module or we push out deployments from there. So that part was definitely much smoother.
Yep.
The planning part, and the planning part was smooth. It just took a little longer.
Yeah.
Just to make sure we had all our ducks in a row, everything was kind of accounted for before we went live with it.
Sure.
So
Yeah, makes sense. And I asked that question because Adobe's a big company. We've got our own processes and bureaucracy and checks and balances and stuff. And typically, it's the internal process that slows us down. It's not really the technology, right? Once you're ready, pull the trigger. And I mean, I've seen customers do this in a weekend.
Oh, yeah.
Just knock it out and you're done. So everybody's different, but the actual technology is normally not the biggest barrier.
Right.
Yeah.
So the fastest changeover we've seen to date is 2 hours.
Wow.
So we know it can be done in 2 hours if you're motivated.
Yeah. Okay.
You gotta really want to change.
They really want to get
That
it
sounds
done.
intense.
I have a question. Maybe this may sound negative, but when for the customers that have trouble with this, my sense of things that it often isn't a technical issue, but sometimes it can be political or resources or things like that. What's your experience there, James? And what advice would you have for them?
We definitely see the biggest resistance coming from an IT organization that has defined processes, like change management processes, right? And we're coming in with something completely new, and they're just scratching their heads because it doesn't make sense. Most of those processes are, we're going to do an ERP system change, and we have to go through these steps, and well, this isn't like that at all. So they have to think carefully about what it is that we're offering, or that we're asking them to do. We've seen some cases where, say, standing up a virtual machine involves a significant amount of red tape, but actually deploying new software, it's an existing process, so there's no change involved. It's make a new package and then push it out. So, when we're introducing something completely novel, some customers, we got that, we'll take care of that. And others say, whoa, wait a minute, we're in a regulated business, we have to go through this. And I'm not mocking them, I'm just saying we see this a lot, where we have to go through a fairly rigorous change management process and ensure that we have the appropriate people.
There's risk, there's a business continuity plan changes,
all that stuff.
finding the right people to work on it.
Yeah.
It can be a big deal for some companies.
So we do encounter quite a bit of interesting scenarios that we couldn't have anticipated. Every one of these engagements has its own little quirks, but we'll get through it. We have a security person on our team who can help not only with answering security questions, but a lot of times we'll get a security questionnaire. There might have been one that was submitted when they were looking at desktop software years and years ago. But now we're talking about something that's a little bit different because there's cloud storage involved. And so we'll go through a second review at that point, which is typically very quick, most of the time very positive, and then we'll move on to deployment. But it does take some time.
Yeah, cool. So we have about I have cards here, two scenarios that have come in from our online audience. One of them is an education customer, and I think we've talked about this mostly kind of from a commercial perspective. But we have a question from an education customer who's asking, generally, how does named user licensing work for education? And then more specifically, in a computer lab environment, would we need some kind of permanent activation? How do I deal with single sign-on for thousands of students? Like, what's that look like?
That's a great question.
Can you summarize that?
Yeah, until we did that last week, that 110 plus thousand users, our biggest customers in the over 80 and around 100,000 users have been education.
Okay.
So this definitely works at scale for education.
Yep.
The education customers that come to us are actually excited about having access to license control, where before they had no control. They'd sell a year subscription and the student would buy it at some point in the fall and then it would expire. It's a call to IT. They don't know what's going on. This way, with the admin console, the enterprise licensing, they're allowed to take that license, not only allowed, they're encouraged and excited to take the license, attach it to the student for the duration of the class that they're taking, and then they'll withdraw it. The labs are a little bit different.
Okay.
Right now, the lab solution is a serial numbers today, but as you said, the serial numbers won't last forever.
Yeah.
We are working on technology right now that is supposed to release at the same time that we make this transition, that will
end of this year.
End of this year, that will allow a lab to have activated software. So the license is present on the software and in the lab, but the user will have to sign in to use it. So it's kind of a hybrid between a serial number and a named user licensing. So the license isn't going to travel with the student. License is embedded on the desktop in the lab, but the user is going to have to sign in to be able to use it. And that way they can have access to their libraries and cloud storage and other components.
Something we're also seeing a lot with education customers is some of the customers are saying, I don't know that I want to manage labs anymore.
Right.
So we're seeing more of the concepts of a walk-up, where you go there, they might have a big monitor, a keyboard, an input device like a scanner, a camera, and students go up there with their own device, usually a laptop.
Right.
And kind of the benefit of that is for our customers to have student licensing for everybody, everyone's got it. So they can walk in there with their stuff and have access to the current software. And that's a change for some customers. Not everyone's there yet.
Yeah.
But that's a big change that we're seeing.
And I think that's a good point, Rick, that more and more of our education customers are licensing all of the students, where previously they might have only purchased for the labs and let the students fend for themselves. They're realizing that there's a benefit, a competitive advantage to licensing all of the students as well as the faculty and staff. So you get 100% coverage. Everyone has access to software. Most of the students are coming in, maybe I shouldn't say most, that's too much of a generalization, but many of the students are coming in with their own computers. And so they can just fire up the software and go. They don't have to worry about it at that point.
So you've got some IT simplicity there, as well as some job force readiness.
Yes,
absolutely. Like I'm ready to go have a real job and get to work.
And it is so much easier, and we hear this over and over from education IT, managing the licenses in the admin console is so much easier than building deployment packages, getting them out to faculty and staff, and then worrying about compliance. That's their biggest concern is, if this installer package with an embedded serial number got out and students start deploying
I could tell you stories.
No, we don't want to hear those.
So what James is talking about there is this notion of self-service.
Yes.
So this isn't play for every commercial account, but in education, you can entitle them to a license and say, hey, Mr. Student, hey, Mr. Faculty Member, go here, go download this Creative Cloud app, and that's your hub to download everything else. And if you leave the organization, I can remotely, as an IT manager, just shut it off.
And we don't have to uninstall the software. That's the important thing for the education IT. If a student leaves, so what? We just de-entitle them, and we don't care that
they have useless, non-working software on their computer. Adobe doesn't care. They don't have to care. You just turn off the license.
So in some cases, some of our education customers have partial coverage for students.
Yes.
So if they're enrolling them in a class, they can give them access to the software for the quarter, and using the user sync tool, they can roll them out of that, and without having to deinstall anything, without having to create a package. You know, a lot of I remember when I was talking about self-service to some customers, they said, you had me at no installer packages.
No more. I don't know anybody who wanted to grow up and build software installer packages for a living. Like,
we have some people who do that though.
Yeah,
just
we can, but it's not everybody's dream. So
true.
It is possible to skip it if the environment makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, do self-service. So let's do this. We're almost out of time. I've got one more question from Kurt, and then we just want to share a few wrap-up resources and some next steps. So the question from Kurt says, we're an enterprise customer and have enabled Creative Cloud and Document Cloud using single sign-on. So that's their current status. In a little bit more detail, he says, we recently had a scenario where Acrobat was required to be made available. Unfortunately, here's I think the crux of the question. He says, unfortunately, access to the internet is not an option for some of these users, but he also knows that the serialized version is not a long-term solution either. So how do we accommodate this solution going forward?
Well, we talked a little bit about the new education option that will be available when we do the switch over at the end of the year.
Yep.
There'll be some other options, and this is where you need to talk to your account manager to make sure that this aligns with your specific use case.
Yep.
That will allow for a disconnected license. So the license would be managed by IT. The software thinks it's doing the same type of remote or named user licensing, but it doesn't actually go to our internet. It will go someplace else that you manage and pick up that license. So I don't want to talk any more about that, but know that this is something that is on our radar. It is slated to be available at the same time as the education, the new education lab model. And it will allow for a number of different scenarios. There'll be the disconnected, completely offline scenario. There'll be a nearline scenario where the machines can be online every once in a while, or maybe they go through a proxy, and then there'd be the situation where they're allowed to be online, but they're not. No, wait, that's not it. We don't want the user to have to validate as frequently, and so there's some options there.
Kind of a longer
Well, something else to remember here is that, and this is common misconception, you have to be online to use Creative Cloud. That's not the case.
You don't have to be online.
The desktop software works offline. It will send a heartbeat every 30 days. Say, are you out there? And if it goes 90 days without getting a heartbeat back from Adobe, it will ask you to log in at that point. So for people who are offline for a period of time, it's okay.
99-day tropical island vacation.
I'm sure you go to a coffee shop once in the 99 days and you're good to go for another 99 days.
Well, I need coffee every day, so I'd be online.
Cool. Okay. Well, thanks for helping with that question.
Yes, indeed.
So as we wrap up, just a few resources to share. You might have a slide, or maybe maybe we can post these links in the chat pod. But a couple of resources that I wanted to make sure you were aware of. One is we have an Adobe IT newsletter. So if you're in IT and you want to not only learn what we share today, but keep in touch with us and learn the latest and greatest, make sure you check out that IT newsletter. We also have an IT Learning Hub. So this is an online web portal you can visit anytime, and it includes customer case studies, best practices, white papers, all sorts of great resources related to a lot of the topics that we covered today that you can download. And then the third step would be, if you are ready for this process and you haven't embarked on it yet, or you need some help finishing it, reach out to your Adobe team and get in touch with them. And we can steer you to next steps, the right resources, maybe working with the right teams at Adobe to help you get that process started or finish it. So I think that's, those are kind of the three resources that I wanted to mention there to make sure that they're on your radar. So thank you guys for joining us. I appreciate Rick and Kevin and James for being here today.
Thank you.
Enjoyed talking with you about this topic, and you guys joining us here in Chicago. So thanks, and everybody online, thanks for being here, and have a great day. We'll see you next time. I don't know if we're offline, but thanks, guys.
Feels like we are.
That was fun.
Are we good?
We good?